I can't believe it's been nearly 6 years now since it happened, but I know it's time to put pen to paper. 6 years have passed, and the event still fills my soul with a sense of dread and icy fear. The years keep churning by, and my soul continues to long for some kind of meaning or explanation for the incident. It was July of 2015 to be precise, and a glorious day, Newcastle, Colorado. Yes, I'm Irish, or Northern Irish, whichever you prefer. Me and a couple of my friends decided to go to the Mourne Mountains and camp out there for the night. We had such a fun time. That was until the dreaded night. Even as I recall the incident, my chest fills with a kind of pressure that makes me feel like I'm going to suffocate. Is this what it feels like to be smothered? Or is this what it feels like to have a post-traumatic stress? I'm Ryan. My two friends are Chris and James. We're all aged in our mid-20s, and so in 2015, we were all like 19 or 20. It was just meant to be a fun trip. We would drink some beers, and maybe even have some swim in the lake. Just get out there in nature. Something that this generation never seems to do. But something happened on this trip. Something that made James lose his hair over the space of a year. Something that made Chris drop out of university and travel to Vietnam to be a monk, and made me a nervous wreck, unable to leave the house. It was bright until like 10:30. The sky was lit up in a gorgeous mixture of yellow and blue, a few stars twinkling overhead. We decided to toast some marshmallows and make s'mores. It seemed to be around 10:30. It got very dark. We laughed and said it felt quite eerie, like the sky had decided to drop off early. Chris complained he was tired, so he went off to the tent, listening to the crunch of his shoes on the dry earth. I leaned back on my folding chair, closing my eyes. About half an hour passed in which I too dozed. James was just sitting there, texting his girlfriend, trying desperately to get reception. I wake up around 11:30, and James was now dozing off too. I heard a ruffling behind us, and I assumed it was a sheep, perhaps a mountain goat. I hissed at James, "Wake up." He did once and looked spooked by the ruffling. It was like the sound of a hoover going off, very quietly, but one that was sucking up the leaves and sending them spiraling into the sky. I lit up my flashlight, going to investigate. It was a rather short walk over to the bushes where I heard the noise. James came too, a little timidly with his light. At once, I dropped my light, and my blood ran cold. Before me was a creature I had never seen in my life, and one I sincerely hope I never see again. It was tall, bony, with a white skeletal body, with a huge long abdomen and a long neck that was about 10 foot tall. Its arms and legs were short, with strange fingers. It looked canine-like, but nothing like I'd ever seen. It was hideous, like some sort of morbid dog mutation. I knew James could see what I was seeing. His mouth was wide open in horror, staring straight ahead at this bizarre dog-like creature. I reached out my mind and put in front of James's chest, as if to stop him from walking further ahead. The creature's head was the same width, with large bulging red eyes, about the size of tennis balls it was like. The ears were perked up, and appeared to have little bits of moisture or slime. We backed-walked, as the creature just walked off into the blackness, almost like it was going the back way around, to get easily to our tents. As we walked back to our tents, we decided to sleep together in one, and woke Chris up. None of us slept a wink that night, but decided to keep the tent open just so we could poke our heads out, whenever there was any strange noise we did not recognize. I haven't been back to the mountains since then. This was a horrific, scary experience, one that has made me afraid and terrified of even the trees, bushes, forests, and yes, even camping. Although time has passed, I have hardly, if at all, spoken of this incident, but rather buried it in my subconscious. I still feel constantly stressed, anxious, unable to leave the house. If anybody knows what the creature is, I would be most grateful for any help. I should mention, its skin was also really strange, like it had mange. I don't know if that helps you, but hopefully it's an added detail that will get me some answers. It's been 12 years now. I was a young guy of 22 then, just fresh out of college, enjoying those really long hot summer days. Now, I'm 34, married, 3 kids. Life has changed and for the better. Although, I put up a happy veneer. My mind just can't escape from the events of what happened on that day. I'll never forget it. June 7th, 2009. To this day, I still wake up in a cold sweat. Even my wife has to reassure me. "It's fine," she whispers. "Nothing's here." She's the only soul I've told this story to. Maybe she thinks I'm crazy. I don't know. Maybe you will too. But I'm gonna share it anyway. I was hiking in the Ozark Mountains with my brothers. The temperature being insane, something like 91. Very little humidity, so we're getting that southwesterly wind that kind of fortunately kept us cool. The saying, "hot as a 4th of July firecracker," rings true for our trip. The Ozarks are glorious, and on this day, the sun was hidden behind the densely packed forest, which covered us with its trees and foliage. One of the main things I recall to this day was just how tired my legs were from climbing up the mountain. I wasn't as seasoned as my brothers. They were all teasing me and calling me names, which I guess I won't share out of politeness. Even though there are all sorts of myths and legends about the Ozark Mountains, we didn't pay any attention to what we would all call in our family fluff. Instead, we had our rifles, as we were interested in perhaps shooting. My rifle was digging into my hip, and as I looked down, it was actually causing a huge abrasion that I was very worried about getting infected if I didn't get some type of ointment. So there we were, trudging along, when I saw a mist in the distance. It was very unusual and peculiar. It kind of freaked me out, to be honest. I had no idea what it was, and when I asked my brothers if I saw it, they laughed, thought I was being a wimp. But it was a mist that was such a whiteness. It looked like a cloud floating along, submerging the trees and adjoining the area into its pole. I didn't know why my brothers decided to turn slightly and walk into this mist, but one of them said it was just what happened in the forest at this time of year. See, for me, I had no real knowledge of nature or science to agree or refute what he was saying, so I just sort of walked with him. My feet were killing me, and so was my back. I desperately really wanted to turn, and I definitely did not want to walk into the icy mist. This was hampering visibility, and actually made me feel like I was walking into a horror movie when I was walking along. One of my brothers let out a yell that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Even writing this makes them stand up. Before us, with the mist, was the strangest, most terrifying creature I've ever seen. It was a man and a dog, but also a dog and a man. A large human shape covered in dark fur, with the head of a German shepherd or wolf, on the forest floor eating the mutilated carcass of a deer. We all stood there transfixed at this bizarre creature and sighting, tracing its disturbing images. I immediately fixed on its large fangs as it was tearing into the flesh with a forceful and brutal ferocity. I wondered what those teeth were capable of, as I became aware of how soft and tender my own flesh was. This was not how I wanted to die, but my heart was now pounding into my chest, and I was certain this thing could hear me. The creature continued to devour the flesh viciously, as if trying to illustrate how powerful its fangs are. My brother cursed. My eyes were frozen on this horrific sight. I traced the edges of my rifle, which, honestly, felt like a toy gun with bubbles in front of the sight of this beast. I took out my gun, raised it up. I could feel my brother's icy breaths on my freezing cheeks as I felt the drips of perspiration beating down my own head, little vein-like icicles running down. In spite of the stifling heat, I held up the trigger, but my hand was shaking so much I couldn't do it. One of my brothers hissed at me to do it. I knew I had to, but my fingers wouldn't budge. It was like I was trying to move lead. Eventually, after a few minutes, this thing retreated into the bushes, taking its kill with it. I blessed myself. Thank God for protecting us. To this day, I never forget the fear that I felt in those moments. Since then, myself and my brothers haven't talked much about that experience. It was just so frightening and scarring. None of us knew what it was or why something so vicious did not try to attack us. But I'm glad to be telling you all this here, and that I could still recall the details. Perhaps somebody will know what it was. If I could paint a picture, it still wouldn't do it justice to the terrifying form that was crouched there before us. The only thing that came similar was I was reading a book, and I saw a dragon-like creature covered in fur. For a split second, I froze, unable to keep reading. My 3-year-old son asked, "What's wrong?" Of course I couldn't tell him. I wouldn't burden my son with such a horrific story. I have yet to even tell my wife. She'd probably think I was crazy. But I'm telling you all this because maybe now it's time to revisit this memory and forcefully make sense of it. Finally, I can move on, and I might even let my brothers know any findings or developments you help me find. Even though we don't talk about it, sometimes we make eye contact, and I know in that our unspoken gaze, we are both recalling the same terrifying memory. A day that was meant to be special, bonding time with my brothers in the beautiful mountains, had turned into something else entirely. An encounter with something strange, savage, otherworldly, like some genetic lab experiment gone horribly wrong. Surely, someone has come across this mist and this creature before. I still have dreams about it, waking up in a cold sweat. So, I know it's time to finally write this, get my thoughts and memories. I'm hoping this will make me free to forget what happened, and throw it away out of my memory forever. Thank you so much for everything you do, and I hope you can supply me with at least some answers.